Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm just setting up so you can see my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay? Let's just check. Awesome. Okay, welcome. My name is Rachel. I work as an education officer for the Marine Conservation Society, and we are a UK-based charity. And our aim is that we want healthier seas. And we work with a team of scientists who monitor the health of our ocean. And what we do then is that we use this data that they collect to speak to people like yourselves. We speak to government and businesses so that all together we can use this information to make good choices in our lives for the future of healthy seas. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to think about some of the amazing creatures that live in our ocean. And then we're going to think about how climate change is affected by the ocean. And we'll also think about how important the ocean is in helping to reduce climate change. We'll chat about how working together we can protect our ocean and ultimately reduce climate change. And finally, we're going to finish with our ocean commitments. So in the chat, I would like you to name me one creature that you can think of, the first animal that comes into your head when you think of UK seas. What animals live around our waters in the UK? So don't try and think too complicated. Think of that first animal that you can think of in the UK seas. So maybe you've been lucky enough to go to the beach before, or maybe that you've seen documentaries with animals living in the UK waters before. What animals can you think of that live around our shores in the UK? We've got a huge range of animals that live here. So we're going to take a virtual dive and explore some of these amazing creatures. So some of you on the chat, I've got dolphins. Yep, we've got dolphins that live in the UK waters. If you've been lucky enough to see them, that's fantastic. Yeah, we've got several different species of dolphin that live in our UK waters, which is really great to see. Fish, obviously fish, yep. So that's the first thing that often people think of when they think of UK waters, they think about fish. And we've got hundreds of different species of fish in all shapes and sizes that live in rock pools or live in the deep water or live in the seagrass beds in the shallow. So loads of different types of fish. What else are we saying? Octopus, yep. Someone said seagulls, which is a good one. So seagulls isn't technically a term. We often refer to seagulls, but technically we just call them gulls. So they can live in land, but they can live on sea. And naturally they would be foresting and fishing in the sea, eating lots and lots of fish. But obviously now they've also adapted to eat things like our chips and stuff like that as well. Puffins, again, it's nice that you're thinking about some of those creatures that live on land but have a huge connection to the sea as well. And then someone has also written octopus, yeah. And seals. If any of you have watched Autumn Watch recently, there's been some great footage of seals there who are pupping at the moment. And if you haven't watched, I advise you to watch it. So lots of ideas that you're thinking about already. So let's take you on a virtual tour and explore some of these amazing creatures that live around our shores. So all of the creatures that you saw in that video live in the UK. We have over 9,000 different species living in our waters. Lots of weird and wonderful plants and animals. And learning about these creatures that live underwater, it increases our passion for it, and that helps drive our want to protect it. Let's look at one of the biggest threats to our marine environment, climate change. So we often hear in the news the damage that climate change is having to ecosystems and environments on land. But less often do we talk about the effects it's having on our ocean. We know that the planet is getting warmer. On land, we are seeing more wildfires and droughts, but our ocean is warming too. In fact, the ocean has absorbed 90% of the excess heat in our climate system. This rise in global sea temperatures is having several effects on our ocean. So in the polar regions, when ice melts on land, that water then goes into the sea. And it's estimated that by 2050, sea levels will rise by 1 metre. Now you might think, well, 1 metre, that's not a lot. But when you think about the fact that the ocean covers 70% of our planet, so think about the amount of water that needs to go into the ocean to cause a global increase by 1 metre, then that statistic becomes quite shocking. This rise in sea level will affect coastal communities and coastal habitats. Due to those seawater rising, it's going to cause flooding. And in some low-lying islands, they could be completely submerged. So increasing sea temperatures is also causing a change in the distribution of animals and plants in the ocean. So in the UK, we are seeing species moving north to try and find cooler waters. And we're seeing species from the south come to our shores as they're escaping the warming waters in their natural habitat. This isn't just affecting fish, as seen on here, but it's also affecting many species, including marine plants. Though this may seem fine because one species is being replaced by another, actually, we might start to see species die out. Because as they move to these new areas, the habitats in those areas might not be suited to them. They might not be well adapted to those areas. There might not be the food, or they might not be able to reproduce properly in those new areas. But we also can see the opposite of this. A new species arriving to an area might do too well, and it might outcompete or take over that area, which will affect those natural plants and animals that naturally live in that area. So in some cases, we're also seeing species moving to deeper waters, which are cooler. So again, those deeper waters might not be well suited to that animal. Losing species, such as fish, from our waters can affect the whole food chain. So rising sea temperatures are also causing a decrease in pH in our ocean, and our ocean is therefore becoming more acidic, known as ocean acidification. This is especially a problem for animals that grow calcium carbonate shells, because it's harder to grow their shells in acidic waters. So you may have heard in the news about coral reefs in tropical waters and about how they're being badly affected by climate change. Now, one of the causes is ocean acidification, as they can't grow their calcium carbonate skeletons effectively. In waters closer to the UK, this could cause a major problem for animals such as mussels and other shellfish. These are not only important parts of the ecosystem, but they're also important parts of our diet. And microscopic plants and animals called plankton also use calcium carbonate. Now, plankton make up the base of the food chain, and they're incredibly important in the carbon cycle. Rising sea temperatures are also impacting our ocean currents and circulation of water around our planet, which then in turn is having an effect on our whole climate. The ocean plays a huge role in regulating our climate and our water cycle. Climate change is also causing an increase in the frequency, how many storms there are, and the size of storms. And it's increasing extreme weather events. This has devastating effects on fragile marine environments, such as coral reefs and seagrass beds. So these are just some of the many ways that climate change is affecting our ocean. There are many more issues, such as the reduction in oxygen in warming waters that are really only understood a small amount, and we still need to do a lot more research in this area. So I want to ask you, have you ever heard of the term blue carbon? So pop in the chat for me if you have heard of this term, and you don't know what it means, then just write yes. If you've never heard of the term blue carbon before, just write no. If you think you might know what blue carbon means and what it refers to, then feel free to have a guess as well. So do you know what blue carbon? Can you think about those two words together, what we're talking about today, what that might refer to? So we've discussed how climate change is affecting our ocean. And now we're going to move on to talk about how a healthy ocean can actually help to reduce climate change. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about is blue carbon and the role that blue carbon has to play in helping to reduce climate change. So I'm just checking on the chat there to see if any of you have heard of this term before, blue carbon. Thinking about what role carbon plays in our ocean and how we can think about looking after it. So a few of you have said that you've not heard of it before, and it's not surprising that you haven't heard of it before, because it's not talked about enough in our environment. And especially our government, they're really not talking about this as much as they should be. So blue carbon refers to carbon that is removed from the atmosphere and then stored by the world's ocean ecosystems. So like trees on land that remove carbon from the atmosphere, plants in the ocean do exact same thing. Carbon sequestration, that's the fancy term that we use for the process in which carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. So habitats such as seagrass beds, salt marshes, and kelp beds, all found in the UK, and mangrove forests found in tropical waters, are particularly good at absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Though these habitats only cover about 2% of the total ocean area, they can sequester or store up to 50% of carbon stored in ocean sediments. These habitats can also sequester and store more carbon per metre than forests on land. And these habitats not only absorb carbon, but they also produce oxygen. Now, take a big breath in for me. And out. Now, You can thank the trees on land for that breath. Let's take another big calming breath in and out. Now, you can thank the ocean for that breath. 50 to 80% of the oxygen that we breathe comes from the ocean. The ocean really is important for the planet. It's the planet's lungs, and we can't afford for it to be unhealthy. Damaging activities such as dredging can have a negative impact on our climate, as the carbon that has been sequestered over time can be released along with methane and nitrous oxide. So we need to stop damaging activities in our seas. But we also need to look on land. As many of these habitats are coastal, we need to reduce pollution coming from the land. And we need to reduce sources such as agriculture, where a lot of that pollution is coming from. Another reason that these habitats are so important is that they are nursery grounds for many young fish that use the shelter to hide in. And they're also breeding grounds for many larger fish species. Now, plankton, seen in this photo here, is the term for tiny plants and animals. Now, 1 litre of seawater can contain thousands of phytoplankton. They are tiny plants, and this can contain hundreds of zooplankton, which are tiny animals. Now, phytoplankton, being plants, produce huge amounts of oxygen through photosynthesis, and they absorb huge amounts of carbon. As plankton is at the base of the food chain, this carbon is then transferred up the food chain to larger fish species. When plankton that isn't eaten by fish dies, their bodies will sink down to the sea floor. This is known as marine snow. Carbon is then transferred from the plankton to the seabed. So, as well as eating plankton, there are many other ways in which our marine invertebrates help to store and circulate carbon in our ocean. But with 90% of our world fish stocks overexploited from fishing, we need to increase protection to allow recovery of fish species, which will in turn help our fight against climate change. Let's take a look at some of these carbon services that fish and other species supply. So as we've mentioned, carbon can build up through the food chain, and then it gets stored in bodies of marine species. So larger, longer living marine animals store more carbon over their lifetime. And when they die, just like plankton, their bodies will sink down to the seafloor, and much of this carbon is then eventually stored and buried in those sediment. Fish that move around in the ocean, and they move from the deep to shallower waters to feed, they help mix the nutrient-rich water from below and bring it to the surface. And this in turn helps to enhance the production of plankton, and therefore can enhance the uptake of carbon dioxide. So nutrients from whale poo also enhances the production of phytoplankton, those tiny plants that sequester carbon dioxide and produce oxygen and are vitally important for us. So I want you to think now about what we could do to protect our marine environment. And again, write on the chat anything that you can think of that could help protect our marine environment. How can we reduce the impacts of climate change? So what do you think that we could do as individuals, or maybe what businesses could do, or what the government could do? What could we all do in our lives to help reduce climate change and its effects on our ocean? just one thing that we could do. How could we protect our ocean? So someone's written stop overfishing, which, yep, definitely overfishing is one of the things, taking that fish out of the ocean, taking too much fish out of the ocean. And as we've talked about, fish store carbon in their bodies. And that when they die naturally, that carbon would then be stored in the ocean sediment. So if we're taking too much out of the ocean, then we're taking away some of those incredible services that fish supply. So definitely stopping overfishing is one of the things that we could do. But often we think about things that we can do, particularly in the marine environment, but all of our actions, everything that we do on land also has effects on climate change and on our seas. So what we're going to do now is focus on the marine environment though. Globally, one of our most urgent actions should be to reduce carbon emissions or decarbonize our economy and protect and recover carbon storing habitats both on land and in our sea. In the UK, our government hasn't shown enough focus on protecting our sea. In the UK's greenhouse gas inventory, on land carbon stores such as woodlands are reported, but our incredible coastal carbon sinks such as seagrass beds are not even mentioned. So some of you have mentioned other things that we could do, such as reducing the amount of litter on our seas. Tomorrow, in fact, I'm doing a talk about how litter is affecting marine environments and how it's connected to climate change. So yeah, definitely reducing the amount of litter is something that we can do to protect our ocean planets as well. And a lot of you have talked about moving to sustainable fishing. So again, yeah, fishing can still happen, but it needs to move to be sustainable. So let's look at some of these managing activities that we can do in our marine environments to protect them and help mitigate against the worst effects of climate change. So we need to decarbonize, reduce the carbon emissions from our ocean-based activities as well as activities on land. So we need to move towards renewable energy sources, such as wind, water, and tidal, and decrease the extraction of fossil fuels. We need to improve the efficiency of our shipping industry. And as we've mentioned already, we need to decrease damaging activities, such as construction dredging, on our fragile and carbon sequestering, our blue carbon habitats. So our fishing industry and fishing practices globally have many negative impacts on our marine ecosystem. But if controlled, they can be sustainable and actually provide positive solutions to climate change. So for most people, the majority of people get their protein, in our diet comes from meat grown on land, which produces huge amounts of carbon emissions. Sustainable fishing practices produce a lot less carbon. And so a shift towards a sustainable fish diet could provide positive solutions and could provide protein with less carbon emissions. Now, protein doesn't just come from fish, but all sorts of seafood. So things like mussels and crabs and even seaweed as well. So one of the ways to reduce the carbon emissions in our fishing practices is to increase the fuel efficiency of our fishing boats and also our fishing gear, our big heavy nets that are dragged behind the boats. We also, as we've already mentioned, need to see a reduction in overfishing. So it's important that the emphasis is on overfishing rather than all fishing practices altogether. But we do need to see a reduction in the fishing practices that cause damage to our important blue carbon habitats. those habitats that store lots of carbon like seagrass beds and kelp forests. So this picture here shows the aquaculture industry. Now, aquaculture is essentially fish farming, and this uses high protein food to feed the fish in the farms. But the food is carbon heavy to produce. And so what we need to do is we need to increase the more sustainable sources of protein being used that are being fed to our fish. So we've talked now about what changes we want to see in industry in our marine activities. But as a charity, what are the Marine Conservation Society doing to increase and protect our oceans? So we fight for marine protected areas. Now these are essentially like nature reserves on land, but they're in our ocean. And we need to make sure that these areas that we choose are climate smart, so that they protect those essential blue carbon sequestering habitats. Currently, marine protected areas don't protect against all activities. And in most areas, fishing is still allowed. So we need to have some areas, highly protected marine areas, where no activity is allowed. And this will give the area a chance to recover and to thrive. And obviously fish move around in the ocean, so they won't stay in that area. And it means that then the benefits can be seen out of those marine protected areas as well. So we have a team of volunteer divers and scientists who go out and they collect vital data on our marine protected areas. And then we use this information to campaign to government for better policy and for better protection. And we also have a team who work with the local community whose practices, such as fishing, might be affected by marine protected areas. It's important that we improve community support and involvement to effectively manage these protected areas. So we're also working on a project in the South Coast alongside the Wildlife Trust and the Inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority. And the aim is to manage fishing practices in the area to restore coastal habitats of kelp, which is a really important ecosystem for many animals, but also great at storing carbon. Seagrass meadows that we've talked about can, per area, sequester more carbon than rainforests, but they're very fragile habitats. So we're working on a partnership project called Remedies, which aims to protect and restore seagrass beds. So because they grow in quite shallow coastal waters, fishing and tourism boats often moor in those waters. So the project looks at what's called advanced mooring technology, but it's a really simple solution. On the left of this picture, you can see a traditional mooring, which has got a heavy chain which scrapes along the seafloor when the boat moves around with the tide, and it can rip up the seabed. On the right, you can see that we've added floats onto the chain, therefore it's lifted and it doesn't rip up the seagrass bed. It's a very simple and effective solution. So outreach and education is also a really important part of our work. So speaking to school groups like yourselves, to university groups and to families all across the UK to raise awareness of the issues, but most importantly, to inspire people to join us in protecting our wonderful ocean environment and its incredible creatures. Now, if you want to hear more about the work that the Marine Conservation Society do to protect our seas and learn more about how climate change is so interlinked, then join us this week. We're going to be looking at plastic pollution and climate change on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we'll be chatting about how fishing is interlinked with climate change. On Thursday, we're going to look at chemicals and plastic pollution, which are in our cosmetics and our clothing, and how these are polluting the sea. And then finally, on Friday, we're going to chat about how you can get involved in shaping policy. If you're interested in maybe a career in marine conservation, you don't need to be a marine biologist. There's lots of different skills where you can help. So today at 1 p.m, we're going to be hearing from a range of people in a range of roles at the Marine Conservation Society. So let's try and summarise by taking and making some commitments. Climate change and the ocean is a huge topic, and we've covered a lot in today's session, but we've only really touched on each subject. But hopefully you're inspired to go out and learn more. So at the Marine Conservation Society, our vision is for seas full of life, and we want to see people thriving sustainably alongside our ocean. Our ocean is facing many threats, including climate change, but our ocean can begin to recover by individuals and businesses making positive differences in their lives. We want to ask world leaders to increase the amount of climate-smart marine protected areas and to increase ocean-based solutions to climate change. And the first and most important step is to pass on your inspiration to others. We want to inspire more people to want to protect our ocean and its incredible wildlife. Climate change can seem like an overwhelming issue, but we need to stay positive and maintain optimism, and that will help us drive forward and make true changes. We all know how infectious someone's smile is or someone's laugh is, and ocean optimism is just as infectious. So please keep on being positive. Thank you so much for listening today. I'll be staying around and answering any questions that you might have in the chat. And for more information and to stay inspired, follow the Marine Conservation Society on social media and take a look at our website. And hopefully you'll join me for some more of the talks that we'll be doing this week on climate, the sea and me. Thank you very much.